Hey there! So I am doing a little video series looking back at the 2023 garden and talking through just some of my highlights, some of the things that didn't work. I just wanted to kind of, for myself and also for you all, I thought you might be interested, kind of capture just what went well, what I want to change. So I just did a video about my favorite containers, and I wanted to talk right now about my favorite plants of the 2023 garden. And then I think I'm going to make one more video about everything that didn't work, because as always in the garden season, some things don't work too. But we had some really great highlights. Oh, you can probably hear all the chickadees. Those are all the chickadees and sparrows that are at the bird feeder fighting over the food. Hopefully they won't be too loud throughout this video. So anyways, I want to talk about my favorite kind of flowers of this season, and then also talk through some of my favorite like vegetable food crops as well that I really enjoyed. If you are new here, I have a small 20 by 20 little urban garden. I do containers and raised beds, and it's a little bit of a tricky gardening space. So some things don't work that would probably work like if in a big full sun garden with lots of room, but it's such a small space and it's such a small garden, and there's not always full sun in every area. So it's always interesting every year, like what works well and then what doesn't, because it just it changes throughout the year. So, or throughout the years, I should say, like different things, different years. It's just a little bit of a tricky growing environment. We're actually moving, so it's going to be changing, and I'm going to be taking you through a whole different garden situation as that develops. But for right now, let's talk about what went well. So flowers wise, let's just start with flowers because flowers are fun. I was obsessed with foxglove this year. I absolutely loved my foxgloves. I did a couple different varieties. I had the foxy foxgloves though, that were a first year blooming foxglove. And then I also had a foxglove. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name. If I can remember the variety, I will put it in. Excelsior foxglove, and that is a second year variety. I actually started those the summer before, overwintered them in my little like plastic unheated greenhouse, and then they came up and bloomed this year, and they were gorgeous. I just loved them. I really wanted to have like a very whimsical, cottagey looking garden this year, and those, I mean, nothing like a foxglove to look like a whimsical cottage garden. Foxgloves just have that exact look, and they were beautiful. They were just so gorgeous throughout the whole growing season. I just thought they were so stunning, and I just absolutely adore them. They were just a total highlight when it comes to flowers. So beautiful, kind of like these really pretty pinky colors. Goodness, those birds are so loud. Just pinky colors, gorgeous. Then I also grew kind of in that same like cottagey tones, but a few different kinds of zinnias. I always love zinnias. Zinnias are always some of my favorite flowers, and in my kind of like weird growing conditions, they really do well. Like zinnias are just a powerhouse plant. You can direct sow them, which is super nice, and they just will handle even like some of my part shade conditions. They'll handle. They're just tough, and they just grow really well. And I grew the Queen Lime Orange zinnias, and they were stunning. Absolutely gorgeous. I took so many pictures of them. I just put them in so many bouquets. Zinnias, as always, are a wonderful cut flower. They're beautiful in the garden. They grew like all the way till the frost. I mean, the Queen Lime Orange zinnias, so beautiful. I did some of the Queen Lime Reds, and I also did like an apricot zinnia, and those were really beautiful too. I really enjoyed those, but the Queen Lime Orange kind of stole the show for me personally. They just have that really pretty like rusty burnt orange color, and then the little like green kind of like edges and everything. They're just romantic. I don't know, they're just really, really pretty zinnia. So I really loved those. Those were a highlight. Another surprise highlight for me were actually some Masha, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, ranunculus that I started from seed. Usually you start ranunculus from corms, but I got some seeds, and I wasn't entirely sure how that was gonna go because yeah, I just like wasn't sure how ranunculus from seed was gonna go, and I almost gave up on them because we got to about April, which is when I get ready to start like all my summer annuals. I get like all ready to do it, and I kind of just like want to throw out everything that I tried to grow for cool weather, but I kept them going, just kind of like let them see what would happen, and they ended up blooming. I think it was probably like early June, and ranunculus again are so beautiful. I'm like the kind of person, I love peonies, I love like the really full like English roses, like those just big full fluffy flowers are so gorgeous, and the ranunculus, always any ranunculus I love, and these were just so fun because they grew from seed. So it gave me a lot of encouragement. Like I think I'll definitely grow them again, maybe even get them a little bit better growing conditions, because they were in like this really small low pot, and so they were kind of small flowers but really pretty colors. I think there was a yellow and like a pinky one, and yeah, they just did so well. It was just kind of a surprise for me, and I just really liked them so much that I kind of like made a note of them, that they were a fun surprise one that was just did beautifully and was like such a highlight of the year. Another plant that just has to be it has to be mentioned because it was like one of the most dominant and beautiful flowers in the garden this year was a black and blue salvia that got absolutely massive. I grew it in a container and it got huge. It sort of took over, like it kind of took over the container, so it was like a little bit of a thug in that sense, but it was so loved by the hummingbirds that I have to give it a highlight, and it just did so well. It was really grown in part shade, totally not in full shade. There was actually a bunch of like coleus that grew next to it and did well, if that kind of like gives you a reference of how it did, even though I do believe that salvia usually is a sun plant, but didn't seem to mind being kind of in part shade. Got huge, did super well in a container. Never really seemed bothered, you know, even throughout like the super hot summer heat. It gets really hot and humid, and especially out here in this garden with the stones out here, like a lot of plants in containers can kind of start like drooping during the day. It's just like we get so much radiating heat, it's just really intense, but it never seemed bothered, you know, like it just never even seemed to need water. You know, I tried to water it every day, but like other things around it in other containers would be kind of drooping and looking sad, and it would just be fine, totally fine, and just covered in hummingbirds. At the Vermilion Aircuphia and that black and blue salvia were the two things that the hummingbirds were just all over. I mean, I had so many hummingbirds in my garden, they were like fighting with each other. It was a lot, but yeah, and the bees and all the pollinators really loved that plant, so it's definitely one that I would grow again just because it did so well, not bothered by a single pest. I never saw any pest pressure on it, nothing on it. It was so healthy and so big and so loved by all the pollinators that it has earned itself a spot in many of my future gardens, because hey, I can't argue with that. Like if you're gonna like barely need water, barely care about the heat, be loved by the pollinators, grow huge, and not worry about the light requirements, like that's a winning plant for me. So I'm trying to think through, those are probably just like all of my top flowers for the year. There's a couple perennials that definitely like get a mention. I always love my coral cream drop phlox. That's one of my favorite phlox ever, and it's beautiful. It was beautiful this year, as it always is. It never disappoints. Again, another plant that for me is just never bothered by any of the pests in my garden. It's always happy. She always comes up, she always grows, even not perfect light requirements. It's just a great plant, lovely plant, flumes. I grew some in containers and then some in the ground. It did well in the containers. It was pretty happy. I ended up planting all of them out into the ground just to give them like a place to be, and I actually ended up giving some to my mother-in-law when I pulled out some of my favorite plants to send to her. So those did really well. Yeah, they're just great. And they're so pretty. And they're like this bubblegum pink, which I just love a pink flower. So that was awesome. And then also my Stillwater's clematis. I bought those 2 summers ago. I like saw them, I think on Laura Garden Answer, I saw them and I was like, I have to have those. I searched them out, I found them, I babied them all winter in containers, and they grew beautifully. They kind of lulled in the middle of the season. In the summer, the vines actually like in the middle, they bloomed really beautifully in the spring. They were like a really awesome early June flower, and then the vines actually like died back in the middle of the summer. It was very strange, but then they came back and they bloomed again. So I don't know, and I've got them in containers right now. I'm gonna try to bring them with me to my next garden. We'll see how it goes, but they're just so pretty. I mean, like exquisite flowers. And the dying back in the middle I don't love, because especially in a small garden like this, like I need things that are gonna be like on point all season long, or I need to be able to like pull them out. So a perennial that like dies like that in the middle of the season, not ideal. But I think they still make my favorites list because the flowers themselves are so incredibly stunning that there's just like nothing like that, and they're beautiful. And so I'm gonna have to keep those because they're just gorgeous. Now let's talk about food, the different edibles that I really loved this season. So I always grow a lot of edibles, and some in containers, some in the raised beds, etc. I'm gonna start with tomatoes because tomatoes are always like a fun one. So I grew my Juliet tomatoes over the arch trellis, and as always, they performed beautifully. They produced so many healthy, incredible tomatoes. Again, not bothered by pests, just like such a healthy, clean plant. Gorgeous. Love them, delicious. My daughter loves eating them. Juliet tomatoes are awesome. I love them. They're like this like salad size tomato. So for my daughter who likes to snack on them, they're great. The other tomato I grew though, and I grew one plant, it took over my entire garden, was spoon tomatoes, which are those like teeny tiny tomatoes. Again, my toddler loved them. Like I will always grow spoon tomatoes for her because they're like the perfect little size for her to get to like pick and eat, but they were crazy. I mean, it was almost too much. Like they kind of pulled my arch trellis over by the end of the season. So it was almost like a little bit too much, but they were really great. And my daughter had so much fun. And like, if you have a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, like they're so much fun for them to pick. They're cute. They're like, pop a little tomato in your mouth. So they were a highlight. Those two were a highlight. I also grew Barry's Crazy Cherry on the arch trellis, and it did pretty well too. I mean, this trellis was packed with tomatoes. It did pretty well too. It didn't do as well with the like kind of part shade situation that my arch trellis is in. It didn't do quite as well. So those were really the tomato highlights, and they were super fun. Another plant that I have to highlight, which is always my tried and true, like some of these varieties I just grow year after year because they do so well, were my salad bush cucumbers. They again did great. They grew beautifully. I got a lot of cucumbers off of them, even though that cucumber area got like a little bit wild and crazy, and they got kind of buried. I did have some pest pressure on them, so that was kind of frustrating, but even despite the pest pressure, they did really well. So salad bush cucumbers are just always one that I'm going to have to mention because they are a just consistently really good variety for me, and I just really did enjoy them. One of my biggest highlights of the year, probably my most surprise and favorite plant that it's more really, I guess it's kind of a decorative but technically it's an eggplant, but it is used for decorative purposes, were the pumpkin on the stick eggplants. I grew them in a grow bag and they did so well. So I grew in a 15-gallon grow bag. I grew 2 plants. They grew up beautifully. They were huge and gorgeous. They were beautiful plants throughout the full season, and then I did harvest them, dry the pumpkin on sticks. I enjoyed them throughout the full fall. They were just absolutely just fun, just so fun and so pretty and so cool and such a novelty, and one that I will 100% grow every year. And they're so cool for fall arrangements and like fall displays. They're beautiful and they grow so well in containers. So I really did have good luck with my eggplants in containers in general this year. I would say I grew a few different kinds, some millionaire eggplants, fairy tale eggplants. They all did really well. The millionaire eggplants that I grew over here in the raised bed are also like a total highlight plant. They did beautifully. They grew so many eggplants. I did have some issues with ants on them throughout the season, but they were great, and I harvested a ton. We ate a ton of eggplant this summer, even from this small garden, so that was pretty cool. And then the other plant that I have to highlight as a favorite were my pineapple ground cherries that I grew in a grow bag, and again in a 15-gallon grow bag. Oh my gosh, happy, prolific plant, not a pest in sight, just beautiful. And again, my toddler like loved coming down to the garden and finding ground cherries. What I did this year with the ground cherries, I've talked about it before, I put them on the patio area. So I put the grow bag on the patio area. And so that way when the ground cherries fall, because the ground cherries, they're in these little like papery kind of pods, and they fall into the ground, and then you harvest them once they've fallen off the plant. So you do want to have the plant in an area where it's like easy to harvest up those cherries once they have fallen. So it's easier, I don't know, it was better for me to have them falling onto the patio, where then I could just pick them up off the patio. The paper can kind of get, like, if it falls onto the soil and stuff, depending on how much you're watering, like they can get kind of wet and dirty and stuff. So it's a great container plant, and it grew really well. Like in that 15-gallon grow bag, it grew beautifully. It got huge. I mean, it was well over taller than me and covered in ground cherries, just covered, produced and produced and produced. I mean, I pulled it out, it was still producing tons of ground cherries. So highly recommend for like a container situation because of that harvesting, you know, the need to harvest it like that. Yeah, it was fabulous. So those were all, like, there were a lot of really good successes in the garden this year. I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting everything. We grew a lot of peppers in containers too. Those always do really well in containers. Peppers are great for container gardening. And yeah, it was a really fun garden season. There were a lot of fun things, and as you could hear, like some surprise things that I wasn't quite, that surprised me, that became my favorites, which is always fun too, because every year as you garden, you know, you start to get these things you grow again and again and again, and it's fun when you try new varieties and they just stand out to you so much. So those were all some really, really fun things and really great. So anyways, those are the favorites of 2023. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.